Have you ever sent in a purchase order to a vendor only for the order acknowledgement to come back and it looks nothing like your original PO? A lot of times you can trace that error back to something in the body of the PO where you might have your description or your pricing. And that's what we're going to go over today. My name is Jill and this is the PO framework. And today we are going to discuss the meat and potatoes of a purchase order, which you would say is the body. And also we're going to discuss the footer, which is more like a anchor to your PO. So let's get started. In previous videos, we discussed the header of a purchase order. And that would be this section right here above the body. This section is what we would call the header, where you would find your PO number, your buyer, vendor, and ship to. Down below, in the middle, you're going to find what we would call the body. And that is where you have the items you want, quantity, and price. And then at the bottom, you have the footer. And in the footer, you'd find terms and conditions. Not every PO has them, but many do. You'll have special instructions for shipping, and you'll, of course, have the total dollar amount. Now let's talk about the body of a PO. Now, nearly every PO is different, but the information it has on it is going to pretty much stay the same. Just the format's a little different. Now, for the body of the PO, we're always going to have quantity. We're going to have the unit of measure, which is like one each or one case. You'll have a manufacturer's number, the description of what it is, and the price. And you'll also have the extended price in case they get maybe 2 or 3 or something. So for today's video, I created this PO and all the information here is fictitious. So here we have the manufacturer's item number. Now I'm careful to say item number or model number. I usually don't say part number. That usually refers to parts like a circuit board or a knob or something. But here we have the item number, and then you move over to the description, which is fine. Now, some buyers like to put their own item number on the PO, and that's for their internal system, for their warehouse guys and for inventory. So if you did see that, it would usually be here. We'll just call it a SKU. Let's say this particular item had a special buyer's number of KL15. Let's just say that. So you would have the manufacturer number first and then the buyer's number second. Now, I need to stress something. When you send a purchase order to the vendor and the software is going to read the manufacturer number, the software isn't going to always look at the description. And even if it did, it's going to prioritize the manufacturer's number. Even when a human looks at a PO, they're going to prioritize that. And I've had a lot of times the description doesn't match the number. And so the vendor, if they catch it, they'll go back to the buyer and say, hey, what did you mean? Did you mean to get the green one or the blue one? Because your part numbers or your model numbers for green and your description says blue. And they'll catch it in time and fix it. But in today's world, everything's moving so fast. People have a ton of POs to process. They're just not going to always do that. They're going to go by the manufacturer's number. So you always want to make sure that is correct. And that's what you want. So now we're moving over to the description. Now, if you'll notice here, it says countertop griddle 36 inches. There's obviously information missing. First of all, you don't have a gas type. Typically, unless you're high altitude, you're going to have natural gas. So you should have had like natural gas underneath. Or this might be an electric unit. Maybe it's a 208 volt unit. Either way, you have to specify that because the vendor's not going to know. That part number necessarily doesn't automatically denote voltage or a gas type. You have to actually type it out underneath the item that you want. And now we're going to quantity. So you have quantity 1, but you're missing the unit of measure. And we have unit of measure. Now for a countertop griddle, it's most likely going to be each. So you'd have each here. You would usually never say a case if you're talking about a big piece of equipment. You might say a case if you're ordering bowls or tumblers or something, but not a griddle. But you have to have that in there. You have to have a unit of measure. You don't want to make the vendor guess. The vendor doesn't have, a magic 8 ball to know what you're ordering. You have to do that, because that way you want to be able to exercise as much control over a purchase order that you can. You don't want to leave it to the vendor to guess anything. You want them to know exactly what you want. That way your order acknowledgement comes back okay. The item that's shipped out is correct. The invoice matches. Everything's good. Because, having any kind of discrepancy, especially in the body of a PO, can be like a ripple in a pond, and it just carries out, the issue carries out all the way till it ships and comes back to you. You don't want that to happen. So now we're moving on to the price. Now, and the total is $1,200, which makes sense because they're only getting one. Now, you also want to double check that price. Sometimes buyers, and they don't always realize they do this, they sometimes use the price, like say they've ordered this exact griddle maybe 3 months ago. They might pull the same price from 3 months ago without checking what the price is today. It's maybe something that was already in their system. So you want to make sure that you have the right discount. And if for any reason it gets a special price, or if this $1,200 is a special price, you want to say why. You want to say, here you would say, per gym, at the buyer, or per, XYZ program. Maybe they have a special program. That way the vendor doesn't have to guess why you're using the special price. So now we're moving to the second item. Second item, you've got the manufacturer number. Good. Now the SKU, like I said, it's something for the buyer to use. It's optional. You don't always have to do that. So that's okay. Something I did forget to mention, a category. I did have buyers who would insert a category in the line item. And that category either referenced the job it was for, like a capital expenditure kind of thing, and it would relate back to the general ledger for the accounting department. So the buyer and the accounting department, they do want to work together to make sure they have, if they do want to include a category on a PO, that way when the accounting department gets the invoice, they're going to pull this PO and they're going to see, oh, that item's for a capital expenditure, or that item is for, such and such department, whatever your categories are, they'll know to match that up. It saves them so much time. And usually you'll see a category, usually you'll see it here, or you might see it here. You'll see the category, like CapEx, something like that. Now we're going to, it says one, quantity one, doesn't have a unit of measure, it should, each. And then we have $14,000 and $14,000. Now, this is described as a double convection oven, where you have one unit stacked on top of the other. Now, for safety reasons, some factories do not ship that stacked. They'll ship the individual units separate, and then they'll send a stacking kit. So that way, when your installer gets there, they can take the one unit, put the stacking kit on, put the second unit on top. It depends who the vendor is. We'll assume for the example of this video that this unit is shipped stacked. But it's also missing the same information as the griddle. There's no reference to gas type or voltage. You would need to reference that. So you could put NG for natural gas or voltage 208. Now, here I have casters. Casters are a very common accessory. Casters are typically sold in a set, meaning, let's say you have, here's your double stack oven, right? And then they have the casters, and then the fourth one back there. And they're usually sold in a set of 4. Now, this purchase order doesn't say that. It should say set. And casters are usually sold by the set. So the $329, which could be on the cheap side, casters they shouldn't be that expensive, but they are. You would have to confirm that $329 is for the entire set of casters. And if it is, it's fine, because you also have the extended price of $329. We're good. Now we're coming down to another accessory, a tray rack, which is a rack that they put inside the oven to set product on. Tray rack is good. And then it says 6. Now, you could assume that's each. You don't always want to assume. And tray racks usually aren't sold by a case. But that needs to be specified that you should put each. $214, you want to confirm that that price is correct, that each rack is that cost, because then it extends to the $12.84. So for this video though, we'll assume that $214 is correct. And now for the last item, we have an accessory kit. Could be like a kit that has the spatula and it has the poker and it has, maybe 6 or 7 things that go with it. And on this purchase order, it says 1. Now, does that mean 1 kit? Or does that mean 1 set? Or does that mean 1 item out of it? Let's assume that this has a spatula, it has the poker, and it has a few other items with it. Does this 1 here only talk about 1 item in the kit, or does it mean 1 kit altogether? Which is what I'm going to assume looking at it, but you don't know. And you also don't have a price. Another reason you don't know what they're asking for. And this PO would have to go back to the buyer, because that accessory kit, unless it's already included with the oven when you buy it, well, if it is included already, typically it's not even put on the PO because their buyer's going to think they're getting it anyway. But for the buyer to itemize this out means that most likely it's something that they would have to pay for. Now, if there was some kind of special deal and the buyer got this for free, oh yeah, we feel bad about that last purchase order, mess up. We'll go ahead and give you this kit for free on this PO to make up for it. That's fine. It's great. Then it should say no charge per whoever, per so-and-so, or sometimes they'll say promo, whatever, but you have to say why it's free. Now, let's say it's not free. Let's say it should be a cost. Then where's the cost? And then where is it over here? Because you're going to miss it here, you're going to miss it here, and you're missing your subtotal and in your grand total. See, that cascades into a problem. So you're going to have to call the vendor's going to have to put this PO on hold and go back to the buyer and find out. And if this PO, hopefully with an equipment PO, a human does eventually touch it. It's just you're going to lose time waiting to confirm that. And the buyer is going to have to create a revision to fix that. Let's assume it's free. Now the footer is your subtotal, and usually you'll see terms and conditions here. Terms and conditions are legal ease. It refers to, and it varies by company, but it might say something like, we're not going to pay 1 penny over what's on this PO, or if there are any discrepancies, please contact us, that kind of thing. It varies all across the board. And then at the bottom, you usually see here, special instructions. Now, in my previous video, when we talked about the ship to portion, I stressed not to split that information, because what you're doing is, if you look at this PO, here you have the ship to information, right? Where it's going. But then you also have information here. Why would you split it in 2 places? When the vendor gets the purchase order, if their software system is processing this, the software might only read the ship to at the top. It might not catch the special instructions. And for that matter, a human might not either. Or humans entering in the ship to information, entering in the body, everything's going great, and then they see special instructions at the bottom. They're going to have to stop and go back and add that to the ship to. It just takes them longer. The payment terms also usually are at the top, but anything to do with shipping, anything to do with the shipping portion should be all in the same spot on the purchase order. Now, I know that some people's systems might not have room to include everything, especially if you need call for appointment, liftgate, all that kind of stuff. And the special instructions serve as a place to put that. If that's the case, you need to say so in the ship to section. Say see below, see special instructions. That's a lot of purchase orders will say that if they don't have room. So now we're getting to the subtotal. And the subtotal is just your items. Okay, just the griddle, just the oven, the accessories, the little accessory kit. That's all it is. So you have the subtotal. Tax. Tax usually refers to sales tax. And if a buyer does not have a resale tax certificate for their state, the vendor's going to have to charge them sales tax. This varies by state. Some vendors want you to have a sales certificate for the state of where your billing address is. And they also want you to have a sales certificate for the state you're shipping to. Now, again, that varies by state. I'm not offering any sort of legal advice here, but you just want to double check that and make sure that you have everything good to go. Now, for the purposes of this video, let's assume that this buyer has all their resale tax certificates. Everything's good. So we'll cross this out. So now you have the subtotal, and then you sometimes might have a deposit. Now, a deposit could be because the items you're getting are maybe special in some way, or maybe it's just the vendor's policy to make everybody pay a deposit. And if you did for any reason, you would put it here. Let's say you put $5,000 down, you would just put 5,000. So you would just be owing 5,000 less since you already paid it in the deposit. Now let's talk about shipping. Shipping is here. And because fuel prices are in flux, I mean, a lot of our vendors, the estimated freight rate they would give us would only be good for 24 hours because that's how quickly freight changes. And so when the buyer has to secure a freight estimate, sometimes the vendor will say, okay, it's good for 30 days. So if your order ships within 30 days, that's the amount they'll charge you. Other times, they are not able to do that. They're just going to say, we estimate that this griddle and this double convection oven and the accessories is going to be $850. Now the griddle probably weighs 300 pounds. The double convection oven probably weighs about 1,000 pounds. And then the casters and the racks and the kit would probably be in their own box. Maybe, let's say 50 pounds. That's a lot. $850 is kind of cheap. The freight would be a lot more for that. But the vendor might have a program where maybe the buyer gets free freight. Maybe your company gets free freight because you hit a certain dollar amount. Maybe you get free freight over 10 grand. That PO or this PO here would qualify for that for sure. But in any case, this shipping, it's always estimated. Always. You can't get guarantees on shipping rates. Just know that it's estimated and you just do your best to come close. And if the vendor does give you an expiration date, they say, okay, it's going to be $150. If it ships within 30 days, and if you go past that 30 days, just ask them for a new rate. Typically, it's not going to change that much. I mean, you don't know, but typically it's not off by that much, as long as you're using the same zip code. And that is basically the footer section. Now, the body and the footer are just sections of a purchase order, but they're an integral process of having everything run smoothly. Because if you have problems in either one, you're going to leak money, and you don't want to do that. And you also don't want to have the wrong item ship out, or maybe have some issue with the invoice, especially if it's an issue with freight, because you don't want to lose all your profit. So it's really important to make sure everything is as accurate as possible. And if there are any questions, go back to the person who gave you the information. Make sure, there aren't any special discounts or programs that maybe aren't noted on the PO that you could note before you send to the vendor. Because every step you take to make sure it's accurate is time saved later on for everybody. If you like this video, please make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.